In March 2021, a single ship got stuck sideways in a canal, and within 3 days, it was costing the global economy around $10 billion a day. The Ever Given, a container vessel roughly as long as the Empire State Building is tall, wedged itself across the Suez Canal, the narrow strip of water that handles about 12% of all global trade. Nearly 400 ships stacked up on both ends, unable to move. The canal was cleared after 6 days. The delays rippled through global supply chains for months. One ship, one canal, 6 days, and it cracked something the entire world depended on without most people ever thinking about it. That's not a story about a freak accident. It's a story about a system built to function perfectly under perfect conditions, and nothing else. To understand what the global supply chain actually is, how it came to work this way, and why it keeps breaking, you need to go back to a decision made in 1956 that changed almost everything. A trucking entrepreneur named Malcolm McLean had a problem. Moving goods between continents was slow, expensive, and chaotic. Ports were human-powered mayhem. Sacks, barrels, crates of different shapes and sizes, loaded and unloaded by hand. A ship could spend 3 weeks docked, while workers transferred cargo piece by piece. McLean's solution was a standardized metal box, a container that could be loaded from a truck directly onto a ship, transported across an ocean, and unloaded onto another truck without anyone ever opening it. That single idea, containerization, collapsed the cost of international shipping so dramatically that by the 1970s, it had become cheaper to manufacture products on the other side of the planet and ship them home than to produce them locally. Geography stopped being a barrier. Distance became almost irrelevant. At the same time, Toyota was changing how factories thought about time. Their approach, called just-in-time manufacturing, was elegant. Don't stockpile parts in warehouses. Order components to arrive exactly when you need them, right as they go onto the production line. No idle inventory. No wasted capital. Maximum efficiency. Western manufacturers watched Toyota outcompete everyone through the 1970s and 1980s and adopted the same model. Then the internet arrived and made it possible to coordinate supply chains spanning dozens of countries in real time. By the early 2000s, a single iPhone contained components from over 60 countries. A standard automobile had parts manufactured on 5 continents. The system was a marvel of coordination and a masterpiece of fragility that almost no one recognized as such. The vulnerabilities were structural, and they came from 3 directions. The first was concentration. Over decades, the production of specific goods had clustered in specific places, not by accident, but because optimization demanded it. Taiwan and South Korea produced around 90% of the world's advanced semiconductors. China manufactured the vast majority of the world's shipping containers. India and China together supplied roughly 70% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients used by the global medical industry. Each concentration made economic sense in isolation. Collectively, they created a system where a disruption in one geography could instantly propagate to every industry that depended on what that geography produced. In 2011, an earthquake and tsunami in Japan knocked multiple component manufacturers offline for months. Within weeks, car factories in the United States were slowing production, not because anything had happened in America, but because specific parts they needed had been made in specific Japanese plants that were now underwater. The industry recovered. Then it returned to concentrating supply and filed away what it had learned. The second vulnerability was the deliberate elimination of slack. Just-in-time manufacturing is extraordinarily efficient under stable conditions. Under unstable ones, the absence of a buffer isn't a design feature, it's an exposure. A warehouse full of spare inventory costs money, which is exactly why companies spent decades relentlessly eliminating those reserves. Shareholders rewarded firms that minimized working capital. The entire logic of modern supply chain management was built around removing redundancy, removing slack, removing anything that didn't serve an immediate purpose. Every year the system got leaner. Every year the margin for error got smaller. The third vulnerability was invisibility. A major manufacturer typically knows its direct suppliers well. Those suppliers know their suppliers. But what about 4 or 5 levels deeper in the chain? Nobody had a complete picture. Complexity hid the dependencies. You didn't know you were critically reliant on a single specialized factory in a city you'd never heard of until that factory went quiet, and then you felt it 6 months later, in your production numbers. Then 2020 arrived, and every one of those weaknesses was tested at once. When COVID-19 began shutting down factories across Asia in early 2020, automakers made a decision that seemed rational at the time. Consumer confidence was collapsing. Unemployment was rising. Nobody would buy cars. So the auto industry canceled its orders for semiconductor chips, the essential microprocessors packed into modern vehicles, to conserve cash. The chip manufacturers, whose fabrication plants run at near total capacity because the equipment costs billions of dollars and can't sit idle, simply reallocated that capacity to other customers. The obvious alternative was consumer electronics. The entire world's workforce had just been sent home, and demand for laptops, monitors, tablets, and webcams was surging. The fabs took those orders. That capacity was committed. What nobody accurately predicted was what stimulus money and lockdown-era spending habits would do to demand. People weren't spending on flights, restaurants, or concerts. They were spending on things: physical goods, furniture, exercise equipment, appliances, gaming systems. Demand for manufactured products surged at exactly the moment the system that produced those goods was already scrambled. By mid-2020, automakers realized their mistake and tried to reorder chips. The answer was no. Fabs were booked 12 to 18 months ahead. Building a new chip fabrication plant takes 3 to 5 years and costs $15 to $20 billion. You can't pivot because you changed your mind. While the chip shortage was quietly developing, the shipping network was coming apart in slow motion. When factories had closed, cargo ships found themselves in the wrong ports with empty containers. When production resumed, there weren't enough containers positioned where the cargo needed to leave from. Then American consumer demand arrived like a wave, and the ports on the U.S. West Coast, Los Angeles and Long Beach together handle roughly 40% of the country's container imports, couldn't process the volume. Ships began anchoring offshore and waiting. Days turned into weeks. By November 2021, more than 70 container ships were sitting at anchor outside those two ports simultaneously, waiting for a berth that wasn't available. On the other side of the docks, the problem was just as bad. The trucking industry was short drivers. Warehouses were so full from the initial demand surge that containers couldn't be moved inland even when they were unloaded. The whole chain locked up. Ships waiting for berths, trucks waiting for containers, warehouses waiting for space, retailers waiting for inventory. And underneath all of it, the bullwhip was swinging hard. The bullwhip effect is what happens when uncertainty travels backward through a supply chain and amplifies with every step. A retailer sees low inventory and orders double what they normally would to protect themselves. The wholesaler sees that spike and doubles their order to the manufacturer. The manufacturer panics and tells their supplier to send everything immediately. By the time the signal reaches the beginning of the chain, a modest real-world uptick in consumer demand has become an apparent emergency at every single link. In 2021, companies that had struggled to source chips began hoarding them wherever they could. Businesses that had faced shortages of lumber or steel over-ordered aggressively the moment supply reappeared. The actual demand signal disappeared inside the noise. Nobody could tell what was real from what was fear. The consequences arrived with brutal specificity. In early 2021, shipping a standard 40-foot container from Shanghai to Los Angeles cost roughly $2,000. By the end of the year, the same route ran $15,000 to $20,000, a nearly tenfold increase in under 12 months. The major shipping carriers, the 10 or so companies that control around 90% of global container capacity, reported profits they had never seen. Maersk, the Danish shipping giant, earned more money in 2021 than in the previous decade combined. Every cent of that came from businesses that needed to move goods and had no alternative, and was ultimately passed along to consumers who bought them. In automotive, the accounting was stark. The semiconductor shortage alone cost the global auto industry an estimated $210 billion in lost revenue in 2021, not because demand fell, but because manufacturers couldn't build the cars people wanted to pay for. Ford, General Motors, and Volkswagen all announced production cuts. Dealership lots sat nearly empty. New vehicles were selling above the manufacturer's suggested retail price, something that almost never happens, because inventory was that scarce and buyers had nowhere else to go. The baby formula crisis of early 2022 told the same story in a different register. Abbott Nutrition, one of just 3 companies that together supplied roughly 80% of American baby formula, had to close its Sturgis, Michigan facility due to a bacterial contamination issue. In a system with meaningful redundancy, a single plant closure would have been a manageable disruption, but the concentration was so extreme and the buffers so thin that parents across the country were driving for hours trying to find food for their infants. No pandemic, no natural disaster, no geopolitical crisis, just the standard operating logic of a system optimized down to the bone, applied until the day it wasn't enough. The surface recovery came faster than many expected. Shipping rates began falling through 2023 as port congestion cleared and the bullwhip worked itself out. Chip supply improved. Automotive production normalized. But the recovery had its own strange aftershock. Companies that had scrambled to build inventory during the shortage had overordered badly. By mid-2022, warehouses were overstuffed. Retailers were sitting on billions of dollars of excess merchandise, goods ordered at peak scarcity prices that consumers no longer needed urgently. The crisis had become a glut. The whip had swung the other way, and it hurt in the opposite direction. Underneath that noise, something structural was shifting. Companies that had lived by just-in-time began quietly building in buffer. The phrase, just in case, started appearing in earnings calls alongside supply chain resilience, terms that would have seemed like concessions to weakness 5 years earlier. Apple, long held up as the model of supply chain optimization, began diversifying manufacturing into India and Vietnam. The concept of China plus one, making whatever you make in China in at least one other location as well, moved from the fringes of strategic planning into the mainstream. Governments moved more decisively. The United States passed the CHIPS and Science Act in 2022, committing $52 billion to rebuilding domestic semiconductor manufacturing. Taiwan Semiconductor, which had never previously built a plant outside Asia, broke ground on a fabrication facility in Phoenix, Arizona. The European Union passed its own version. These decisions were expensive and politically complicated, but they represented something genuinely new, a public acknowledgement that the cost of dependency had been systematically underestimated for decades, and that rebuilding redundancy was worth paying for, even if that meant accepting some inefficiency as the price. What the supply chain crisis ultimately revealed is that the global trade system was never really designed to be resilient. It was designed to be cheap. And for most of the history of modern globalization, that distinction was invisible, because the failures were rare enough and small enough that the cost of fragility could be quietly absorbed. What changed in 2020 wasn't the fragility, it was the scale of the test. For 30 years, companies transferred risk out of their own balance sheets and into the structure of the system itself, concentrating production, eliminating buffers, removing every redundancy the market would let them remove, because shareholders rewarded them for it. The risk didn't disappear, it just accumulated, quietly, in the architecture, until something large enough came along to find it. We built the most efficient supply chain in human history. We just forgot that efficiency and durability are different things, and that for a very long time, we were only measuring one of them.